Hey guys, Matt Rowe here for Zwift Coaching Podcast episode 18. Here with Greg and Kev as always.
Hey mate, how you doing? Good to be here again.
Yeah, good, thanks Matt. And how you going, Greg?
Very good, mate.
Good stuff. So today's podcast is all about the back end of the season, where riders maybe get fatigued both physically and mentally. So for the pros, the kind of season's been going for 9 months or so. For the amateurs, the sporty season is almost as long. And for the racing cyclist, the amateur racing cyclist, there's no opportunities to race 12 months of the year across your different disciplines. But for most, there's a period of downtime or an off-season. And now we're not going to talk about the off-season in this podcast. We'll save that for another day. But rather, today is all about that final month or so of the season. So for the pro peloton, some are in that phase now. So let's talk pros, guys. So for a rider who has been racing flat out all year, how do they tend to feel at this time of year?
Well, I guess this is something that's it's surprisingly common. And Greg, I'm sure you'll have lots to add to this, but even for professional riders, motivation that comes and goes throughout the season. And for the guys that aren't riding world championships, that motivation to do those 6-7 hour rides, it certainly starts to wane.
It's it's definitely one of those things. It's one of those key things to having a good end of the season. And funny you should mention that. You know, a lot of pros do lose that motivation, and it's actually a really good time to pick up some fantastic results, because even though the tour's finished, the Worlds might be finished, the Vuelta might be finished or whatever, there's still some amazing races still, like huge races on the cards still. And these guys that have signed these contracts or whatever, and you know, are now just sort of rolling at home, so to speak, you've got some fantastic races coming up still. And it's if you can keep that motivation on, if you can keep that head switched on and do the correct, you know, training and stimulus to keep your form going, you've got some great opportunity to pick up some fantastic results. So I never really had a problem at the end of the season. I mean, okay, there's obviously that, you know, you'll get that extra motivation if you don't have a contract. I mean, imagine how hard you'll be racing to pick up those results, because it might just get you that contract at the end of the year. But also there's like I said, like I keep saying it, there's some fantastic races out there still, some like huge prestige. So it's just about keeping the correct amount of stimulus, the correct amount of training stimulus, and then keeping your head screwed on basically.
Yeah, just to add to that too, Greg, like the calendar for the pros, the World Tour racing goes right through until October, where there's the races in China. So there's still World Tour races up for grabs.
Absolutely. And you look, any of those World Tour results on your Palmares looks fantastic for any potential sponsors, potential employment. So it's there are definitely no question some people waning in motivation, but there's it's still very, very intense racing.
Yeah, and I find that as a coach, and for other coaches out there, I'm sure it's the same thing. This time of the season, psychology is more important than physiology in some ways. Just motivating the athletes to get out there and get the hard work done or keep the volume up. The hardest part is the psychology behind it, and that motivation, as Matt just mentioned there. And that's where you as a coach, you can really have a massive influence on a rider's season just through the way you support your riders and how you feed that motivation to them.
That's a good point there. I mean, one side of things is the physical training, but you're almost like a lifestyle coach, and you know that motivation side of things. At the end of the season, heads perhaps slightly drop a little bit. It's just that someone to talk to, kind of that lifestyle coach type role, just to help keep heads screwed on and keep them going for the last couple of weeks.
Now, I've got to admit that when I first started coaching, I guess at the high level, before that, I just assumed that every pro was motivated by every race from beginning to end of the season. I just thought that would be normal, but I soon realised that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah, I was just saying on how many races we do a season though, and you know, once especially when you've been around in the peloton for so long, you know what races you're actually capable of making an effect on, or having an effect on, or even a chance of winning. So you can see that like some races you know that you're using for training, some races you're definitely there to have a crack at. So it's like, you know, once you've got 80 races in your legs, there's definitely you pick and choose your battles, so to speak.
And that contract side of thing is huge, isn't it, Greg? The guys that haven't got a contract, you can tell who's racing for a contract after July, can't you?
100%.
And looking at the amateur side of things, so sportifs, almost 12 months of the year, you can literally ride a sportif every weekend if you want. And I always say to riders, even if you haven't got any serious racing goals and you're just doing these events for fun, the kind of the concept of periodization and kind of setting goals, that those principles apply not just to the pro, they apply to everyone. So even if you're a sportif rider, set yourself some goals, even if it's just to try and go a little bit better than you do in one sportif than another sportif. Set yourself these goals, chunk your season up into phases, and always give yourself an end date for the season. And it doesn't have to be the racing season, as you said, for people who don't race. Even if it's just sportifs, say, right, this is going to be my last sportif of the year, and just kind of target it. And in that last, I think that helps with motivation, and as simple as having that end date. So if you write down, 10th of November is my last event, my last sportif, then I've got maybe 40 days, which may be 25 training days to go. That's a fantastic way to keep that motivation up and spur you on towards the end of the season.
That's a good point there, Matt. And I think a contributor to the mental fatigue for any athlete now, amateur or professional, is structured workouts. The knowledge out there for training is huge no matter what level you're at. And the mental intensity required to go out there day after day and complete structured workouts, it's quite taxing. So for all riders, as you mentioned then, Matt, giving yourself an endpoint for training, even if you just give yourself a period of time where I'm going to follow structured training and do it precisely, and then I'm going to have a period of time where I'm going to ride as I feel for a while there, that mid-season break. To give yourself a break from really strict, structured training is a huge benefit to continue through the season.
One of the other things I would like to add there, I think is not a bad idea, is you think about, again, if we go back to how many races we've done, how many training sessions, how many structured training sessions we've done through the season now, it's the volume is there. Like you've actually got, as a pro, you've got so many kilometres in the leg. You may have 1 or 2 grand tours in your legs already. So it's actually quite nice this time of year where the volume doesn't have to be those long 6-7 hour rides anymore if you're not doing worlds or anything like that. It's actually a matter of just that priming, that neuro priming as we call it, and it's about some short, sharp stuff just to keep your body sharp and ready to race. You may do one longish day, probably only has to be 4 hours, and then because of all the work you've done throughout the whole season, you're ready to race. It's actually quite nice in the training aspect of things. I always found in my season it was always a nice time for training. The weather was always not too hot, and you could actually really go out and, like you said, some days just go out and enjoy yourself and just go for a ride. But when you were going to train, it was like just short and sharp, and you were done.
I say, well, once again, bringing what you're saying there, Greg, back to the amateurs. If you've had a season long of doing long steady rides, really working up to these maybe races or sportives, again you've got that big bank of endurance as well.
Yeah.
So you may not have done grand tours, but you've probably done big weeks back to back training for these sportives and done some big single day sportives. So you've also got that big bank of volume. So when Greg says for the pros you may kind of reduce it down to the 1 4-hour endurance ride per week, for proportionately then taking that for you amateurs, that means it's just one weekend 2 or 2.5 hour ride, which is fairly easy to get your head around. And then around that one longer ride, you just do your Zwifting or do your short, sharp stuff. Maybe you get involved in some hill climbs. I think we'll come on to talking about hill climb season in the UK in a minute. But yeah, what Greg said there, bang on, and the principles apply on a smaller scale to the everyday rider out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and what you've both just mentioned then is exactly what riders are doing. And I can give the example of a rider that completed the Tour de France. That was the goal for the season. And their next scheduled races were the races in Quebec and Montreal. Motivation after Tour de France was waning quite substantially. And And as you both said there, the volume is there, the fitness is there, but to maintain that and to be race ready, all we did was what you said there, Greg, 1 endurance ride a week, and we were doing 2 Zwift sessions a week. So we had 3 structured works out for the week, and the rest of it was just riding as they feel or even days off. And they were actually reducing their volume down to almost 10 hours a week of training with 2 hit-outs on the ergo, on Zwift, an endurance ride, and they went and raced Quebec and Montreal and raced it well. So that's an example of this is what people are actually doing in the real world.
I think the key point there, raced it well. So these guys, off that 10 hours, that hugely reduced volume, you're still able to race well. And that, again, all comes down to being smart with your time, being smart with your athlete. And as we've alluded to, we're not, even the pros, not robots. It may be their job to go out and ride their bike, but they're not robots. And we've all got, kind of feelings and emotions, and you can't be switched on 100% of the time. So, the fact that, Kev, you've got riders there who are competing at the highest level on 10 hours, for you amateurs now, if you're not used to training, hours, 10, 12, maybe up to 15 hours, if you're knocking that down to maybe 6 hours a week, which should be manageable for a lot of people, most people, you can kind of maintain that good form, which is the great thing about it. But obviously the key being that short, sharp intensity, be quite focused with your training. And there's obviously a wide range library on Zwift of sessions that you can pick out if you're not sure what to do. There's just subscribe to one of the training plans. Another point I was just going to mention is obviously the later you go into the season, so the longer into the year that you ride your bike, that kind of defers your off period, which we'll cover in a separate podcast, separate topic, but obviously defers that period of that break, which obviously means then you can start your training later. And that obviously has a knock-on effect on the following season. If you're kind of racing into October, perhaps your off-season comes in November, chances are you're not going to be on peak form for Tour Down Under and all the Australian races. But that's obviously one benefit. I think in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm talking about the UK specifically, where I'm based, we always get pretty good weather in spring, and even into October, the weather can be pretty good. So there's obviously a temptation there to, if you can keep riding into September and into October, that means you're having your break in November as opposed to, and then you basically shortens your winter.
Yeah, you're right there, Matt. Everyone starts the season January 1, nice and motivated for the year ahead and hitting the targets and the training perfectly. But when it comes down to September, October, that's when it gets a bit harder to get the miles in and the racing and so on. So as you mentioned there, if you have had a break mid-season, it is important to finish the year deep into the season, deep into the year. So riding through until September, October, and then having a break in November is normally the break for most people worldwide for time away from structured training or from the bike completely, and then resuming in December. So that's a normal sort of plan for a lot of athletes, but it does depend on when you finish your season during the year.
An old pro once told me, Eric Zabel was like, the later you finish and the better you finish your season and the better condition, the level above you start your next season. And it sort of always rung quite true with me. It was like, if you could somehow manage to race the Vuelta well and then into Worlds and then a couple of one-day races even after that and finish in a really, really high level, you would always start the season a level above most other people you were racing against. So it's always another thing in the back of my mind was when I was pro was like, if I finish on a high level and into my off season really, really fit, then you start your season again just at that slight level higher.
Yeah, that's how you progress, isn't it? That's a good point.
Yeah, love that from Eric. What about nutrition, guys? Because I think coming towards the end of the season, I think it's easy to let it slip a little bit early. And if we're saying you're going to reduce training load, if you're reducing your training load, your metabolism may reduce slightly, but you let your diet slips. You start eating a bit too much junk food, maybe. Let a couple of beers slip in there as a pro. What's the advice on nutrition towards the end of the season?
Don't race Lombardia.
Don't race. Is that because of the red wine?
That's because it's so hilly. And if you put on an extra couple of kilograms, it won't matter.
Yeah, but what you just said then, Matt, you pay for it when you start the next season, like Greg said then. So the more disciplined any rider is, no matter their level, the more disciplined at the end of their season, they're going to start the next season at a different level again. So if you've let yourself slip in terms of nutrition, gained some weight or whatever, you're going to spend the first 6 weeks working that off again before you start gaining fitness. So it really is about being quite strict and sticking to your plan.
You tend to learn your body quite well, though. You learn, like, you know what you can have and what you can't have. And I think as you get older also, it's like, it's not such a big thing to, I can have some chocolate. I can have, fish and chips or something. It's like, yes, there's times of the season where, you live like a monk, but you don't have to live like that 24/7, the whole year round. So you have to make sure that there are times where you do go on a holiday during the season and just relax some parts. And for some people that can be diet, because a lot of people do struggle with what they eat. But I think once you've been around for a while, you get to learn your body and okay, what you can actually have. And then it's the last thing you want to do is pull on your cycling kit in January or whenever you start, or December, and start your new season, and you need 2 sizes bigger of kit. That's the last thing you want, because like Kev said, it's 6 to 8 weeks before you even feel like a bike rider again. So it's just not worth it.
Yeah, but going back to a few years ago in pro racing, the early season races were for losing weight, weren't they?
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? That actually wasn't that long ago, but and since Tour Down Under has become World Tour, it's like we spoke again about periodization and things like that with training camps. It's like this group here, you guys are getting ready for January, so your training camp in December, we're flying in December because in January we were racing for World Tour points. So it's all structured. There's 28 guys on a team. It's all structured for different parts of the season.
What about, I guess, for professional riders, the amount of race days has reduced, but for amateur riders, there's more racing available now, isn't there? So in some ways, they're increasing their race days during the year now as well.
That's incredible, isn't it? Like the amount, if they're not, if they're not training, they can pick almost any day of the week. Especially, I remember when I was amateur in Belgium, it was like you could pick any single day to go race a kermesse. It was like, and that's when you have a real problem with, overreaching, like chronic overreaching, or non-functional overreaching, actually. Where you actually almost can head towards that chronic fatigue state. So it's you have to be careful with so much racing.
Yeah, I mean, in UK, you can race, especially if you're in the southeast around London, you can race 7 days a week in good quality fields. I think people look at racing as being, quite motivating. It's quite social. You go there with friends maybe. On the weekend, there's always loads of road racing. There's obviously the sportive scene. And this is just on the road side. If you do a bit of mountain bike as well, and track as well. You can ride the track 7 days a week.
Yeah.
So if you want to really get stuck in to racing, you can do it literally 7 days a week. And as you said, there's that risk of burnout. But also at the end of the season in the UK, so October, November time, we have a big hill climb scene. Do you guys have that in New Zealand, Australia?
No, not in Australia.
Not New Zealand. And if we did, I'd avoid it like the plague.
Okay. Avoided the plague. Me too, personally, but there's a lot of people who love it. And it's, I think it's probably a bit of history there somewhere. I could have read up on it. But hill climbing is massive. Only for a short period, maybe probably 6 weeks. And hill climbing just goes bananas. So, and I think it's a great way for people to extend their season without that kind of... It's a new motivation, right? But also the demands of hill climbing. You're not looking to do a 100-mile sportif or an 80-mile road race or whatever. These are all, they pick climbs that tend to be 3, 4, 5 minutes long. Mostly, you do get some that are 10, 12 minutes long. There's not that many hill climbs in the UK that are that much longer when you're riding full gas. But I'd say the hill climb season in the UK is fairly big. We have a national champs, is national hill climb champs, and I think the transition in terms of riders training, when you've done a season long of road racing or sportives, whatever it may be, all this long endurance aerobic work, then you come to saying, right, well, actually now I want to switch my focus to hill climbs, and let's take a typical hill climb to be 5 minutes. And the training for that is drastically different. So all of a sudden you can kind of scrap all the volume you've been doing. So those 4 hour, 3 hour, 2 hour road rides, you can almost scrap all of that, and you can probably train and be in top condition for these 5 minute hill climbs, like a pursuit on the track, isn't it? You can kind of train for those really, really well. Or I'd probably argue 4 hours riding a week. A lot of top end, really engaged in those fast twitch fibers. A lot of capacity work across different durations and weight as well. So we spoke a little bit earlier about how nutrition is really important, and if you're doing these hill climbs, then as we know, weight is really important when you're going uphill.
Yeah, in Australia we have a huge summer criterium series in most capitals, and that's the big thing in Australia during what we call the off season then. And like Greg said, you can race most nights of the week in your capital cities and find the race somewhere. So yeah, the training's probably decreased because you're racing so often and the races are shorter, so the training's more intense as well.
With those hill climbs in the UK, I've seen pictures and things like that. They have these mad bikes, don't they? Like where is there a weight limit to the bikes? I don't think they're under UCI regulation, are they?
Yeah, there's no limits. Yeah, you see guys taking the. I think you need to have one brake on the bike, so you take the back brake off. You ride single gear, like strip, no handlebar tape. Literally, you stripping that bike down to absolute bare minimum, and I dread to think how light they are. But they're very, very, very specialist bike.
And then it's just full gas training, isn't it? I mean, you've just got to have massive lactate capacity, massive lactate tolerance. And 4 or 5 minutes flat stick. It's like absolute lung buster. I've seen some videos of it. It just looks, and the bikes they have, I'm sure it was like 5 kilogram bikes or something like that. The UCI weight limit's 6.8, so that's what the pros can ride. You can't go under 6.8 kilograms. I'm sure the bikes are just under 5 or something like that. It's unbelievably sometimes they don't even have a seat on the bloody thing.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And again, these hill climbs, because of the time of year, the weather does get a bit colder in the UK, and you've got perhaps 100 guys in the middle of nowhere, and you at the bottom of a climb, and you've got 100 guys flying up this climb as hard as they can. It's maybe 3 degrees on a Sunday morning. I mean, to a lot of people, it's just absolutely bonkers. But there's that culture in the UK. Cyclists are all a bit bonkers in their own little way. But yeah, Sunday morning, crack of dawn, go smash yourself for 5 minutes up this climb, get a time, cup of tea, go home.
It sounds like fun. It'd be a good little community. It'll be like you said, like the track scene. Like as you can imagine now, the track season's just beginning. First World Cup's in October, so you've got a couple of 6 days happening now as well. So it's just as the pro road season winds down, the track season starts to open up. So it's like you can actually race and change modes of racing to keep that motivation. But you can race 12 months a year.
You just mentioned 6 days then Greg. Did you ever do a 6 day yourself?
Yeah, I did a few of them. Yeah, I was lucky enough to get around. So they're an amazing carnival, really. It's like a circus. It's unbelievable. It's some of the racing and some of the tracks. The crowds are just incredible. They're on the inside. I don't know how many beers in, but they're quite enthusiastic. Let's put it that way.
Awesome. And slightly off topic, but if you haven't heard of a 6 day, just Google maybe Ghent 6 day, watch a couple of videos of that, and great spectacle, great festival, as Greg said, could be something to do this winter. So talking, I guess coming to wrap this up, our chat on end of the season. If someone's struggling for motivation, Kev, have you got a session that riders could complete towards the end of the season to kind of keep them ticking along? Yeah,
so I've got a session that I mentioned earlier that we used between the Tour de France and racing in Canada. This is a session that anyone can implement. And as we spoke about, it's about just maintaining the fitness that you built earlier in the year. So we're not looking to really extend ourselves too much. It's just a matter of touching on certain energy systems and keeping in touch with that. So the session we have for listeners, it's called Season Base, and it consists of 5 6-minute threshold intervals with 2 minutes recovery. But during those 6-minute intervals, we want to change our cadence from low 85 up to 105 throughout the 5 minutes. So give yourself a bit of variance in cadence there. And then we just finish the session with an easy 15 minutes tempo after that. So it's not an overly hard session, but it's enough to cause some fatigue, build up a sweat, but mainly give you a good workout to maintain all the fitness that you've built earlier in the year.
Yeah, there we go. Anything else to add for this section of the podcast, guys, before we move on?
I guess probably should, just to wrap it up and just to make our ideas clear, like for any rider, amateur or professional, the season is long now, and probably the biggest factor to limit performance is motivation rather than physical performance. So for all riders, if they can start their year by planning out their season, writing it down, picking certain goals, as you've mentioned earlier, Matt, pick certain goals and then work towards those goals with structured training. In between those goals, give yourself a period of unstructured training and just that mental break from having to follow a really strict training program. So that would help you hit your targets throughout the year, hit your goal races, but also maintain the best fitness for those races as well. That'd be my suggestion.
And like Matt said, was pick that end point. You know, if you haven't got a last race on the calendar, but you have a sportif in mind, pick that last sportif, count it in and count it down how many training days towards that, and then mark that down on your calendar as, okay, this is the final one. So then you do actually have an end point. For
amateurs especially, if you're not paid to do this stuff, chuck in, maybe if you love swimming, chuck in a swimming session a week. If you love going to the gym, go to the gym. And even if it's running, just chuck in some sort of other exercise into the mix will just help keep that general fitness, keep you fit aerobically. Chuck that into the mix if you're struggling. There's no point in grinding through kind of a couple-hour road ride if you're really not enjoying it. Do a little bit of swimming maybe, and obviously Zwift is a fantastic way to keep stimulated, keep motivated, and obviously the gains you can get off a 40-minute Zwift race or a Zwift session, equate to you need to spend multiple hours on the road to do that. So motivation-wise, switch it up a little bit and don't be afraid to do something different. All right, well, that kind of wraps up the main part of the podcast on the end of the season. The next part is terminology, so cycling terminology. So, Greg, you're up, mate. Are you ready?
I'm ready, mate.
All right, mate, you got 30 seconds to describe the term autobus.
Autobus. I know why you said that, because I spent a lot of my career in the autobus. So that can be called the gruppetto, but it's typically the last bunch on the road, and it's typically full of, on mountain days, it's full of sprinters or guys that have worked early in the stage and are now cruising in home to make the time cut. But don't be fooled, the autobus is not going slow. We're actually riding quite hard because we have to make it inside the certain time cut that the organisers make during a tour.
G'do. It's a hard place to be, but it's got to be good crack in there, isn't it? Good banter. All along with the common goal, just getting towards the finish. Must be trying to keep each other's spirits high.
At times, yes, there's good banter. At other times, there's not so good banter. When someone's riding just that little bit too hard, there can be some words exchanged. Let's put it that way.
So, Greg, in the autobus, is there somebody in charge of doing the maths if they can make the time cut or not of the bunch?
Yeah, normally. And actually,
Good question.
I was actually the guy there for years and years. I was the guy that would do the calculations of time cut, and it was I remember. I think it comes with it's usually the most senior guy in the peloton, because he's been there for so long, and he sort of morph into that role. So it was. But I remember one Volta, and I remember Mitch Stocker came up to me, and then I had all the young guys as they were coming on as pros, and we'd been dropped really early in the stage because Astana had lit it up this climb, and we were well out the back, and there was a fair chance that we weren't going to make this time cut, and they were asking, because it was a huge peloton too, but you have to actually have a third of the peloton to then they go, okay, time cut was too hard, and they allow you back in. So you've got to have, 70, close to 70 riders, 60 riders in your peloton. So and that's a massive group. So if you've got 40 or 30, which is still a massive group, they'll happily eject you from the race. And they were asking, so Greg, are we on time? And I went, well, we're going to have to ride full gas from here to the finish, like literally as hard as we could. And we made the time cut by like 30 seconds. It was just madness. Otherwise, you're gone.
So would you ride hard on the climbs and take it easy on the flats, or other way around?
Other way around. We wouldn't, but not easy. Like we had to ride a solid tempo, but to keep everyone together. But it's okay because everyone's at the similar level on the climb. But then we would just bomb these descents, and we would just rail on the flats, just swap off as hard as we could on the flats, because that's where we knew we could actually take some time back on the race, because we were fast descenders and strong, powerful guys. We just don't climb fast. So it was basically the math like that, and you're working out, okay, this is a mountain stage. So but depending on the time in which the finish guy finishes, because it's done on a percentage of how fast his average speed. So it's a really complicated equation to work out. But and then of course you've got radio contact with your director as well. So you're always going back to the car to make sure with him, are we on time? Are we on time?
And so say, Greg, the autobus is going up a climb, 40 guys, and 3 guys are getting spat. What do? Do you wait for them and think of the greater good, or do you crack on? I guess it comes down to how much time you got to play with.
Nah, they'll find their way back, mate. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, we'll leave that there, open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And obviously, one guy that spent a lot of time in the autobus this year was in the Tour de France was Lawson Craddock. And obviously he wasn't necessarily a sprinter suffering there. That was because of injury. So obviously you're carrying some wounded soldiers in the autobus as well.
That's normally what happens too, yeah. The day after a big crash, you'll see quite a few of those guys are in the autobus with you. Exactly.
All right, guys, quick fire question. So, if you could win a monument, a Grand Tour, World Championships title, or Olympic Games, which would it be?
For me, no question, it would be a world title.
I would say a monument.
And I'd say the Tour de France. So you got a bit of a split there.
But this question surely focuses around Greg and his experience.
Yeah, I'll say you've done all of these, Greg. So just talk us through your logic there.
Well, it was a toss up between Olympics and Worlds, and not a lot of people know this actually, but a world title is actually harder to win than an Olympic title, because Olympic title has such limited numbers in the field that you're actually racing against less people. Okay, for qualification's a little bit harder, but if you're at the top of your nation, you're going to qualify. But then actually who you're racing against is a weaker field. Whereas at the World Championships, the numbers are so huge, you're racing against everyone, the best of the best in the world. So I think that's why I'd love to win a world title. A monument is, maybe if I came from Belgium or Holland or somewhere like that, I think that could be more of a motivation for me. But if coming from New Zealand or this side of the world even, I think for me, a monument, I wouldn't, it's just not in the general public's eye as much. And then a Grand Tour, absolutely, of course I'd love to win it, but it's just, I think because I'm thinking logically and realistically, it's like, it was never within my realms of ability. So it's just like one of those things I love to compete in. I love the bunch sprints and the Grand Tours. I still get goosebumps watching them, but to win one, I just have no interest.
Well, mate, don't worry about thinking logically, mate. I've said Grand Tour, and there's more chance of me winning an egg and spoon race than winning the Grand Tour, but I've gone for it anyway. And but for me, Grand Tour, just because you ride past, say you're in a group and you're cycling through town, and a member of the public will joke around, "Oh, it's the Tour de France," and you speak to any member of the public, and think cycling, they think Tour de France.
Yeah.
And it's just the biggest, got the biggest profile, probably the biggest prestige in my mind, and just just a brutal event. to win. So although it'll never happen, of course, I'd probably go for Grand Tour.
Good call.
Which monument would you be winning, Kev?
It'd have to be Roubaix or San Remo. For me, they're the interesting ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
A
cool.
lot of prestige behind those.
Good. Well, let us know what if you listeners out there, let us know what your pick would be out of the 4 options: Monument, Grand Tour, World Champs, or Olympic Games. Just let us know on the comments below a Twitter post or on Facebook. So we're going to move on now to the Q&A section. So we've got 4 questions from you listeners, and as always, if you've got a burning question that you want answering, fire away and we will do our best to answer it for you. So first question is from Ryan Rourke, who sent this question in via Twitter. Thank you, Ryan. And Ryan's asking, what is the benefit of asymmetric chainrings? Chris Froome uses them, so they must work for certain types of riders. I'm wondering if I could benefit.
This is a tough one, and I think it's the kind of question that you can Google and find the answer that you want, either supporting their use or supporting their lack of benefit. So I think it's something that is still a bit misunderstood in some ways, but I sort of lean towards the side of not using them for a few reasons we'll talk about in a moment. But Greg, you've got experience riding these, haven't you?
Yeah, so I rode them for 2 years on Team Sky, and I found there's areas in my cycling that I really, really like them. Like I've got some gains, and then there was some particular areas where I definitely felt not hindered, but they weren't ideal. So for me, the idea behind them is obviously your dead spot in your pedaling stroke is basically, from, they say 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and then down at 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. That's those parts of your pedal stroke are where your less power is employed, and it could even extend further than that. So basically, with these chain rings, it skips your leg forward over these dead sections quicker. So you actually get so you're on power effectively nearly your whole pedal stroke, and in terms of that, I can actually say that it feels like that's what's happening. I remember when I first started riding them and started my endurance training on them, and my glutes, I was always a track rider and always had a nice pedaling stroke anyway from so much track cycling, but I noticed my glutes were just absolutely exploding. I must have been employing my glutes so much more, which isn't a bad thing because they're such a big muscle. So I was going, okay, I'm definitely on the pedals more because I'm employing the glutes more, and I found I could really, really push a big gear and really get that big gear going. A 54-11 would be really nice, and on the big section of those asymmetric chain rings, it's almost like a 58 chain ring because it extends out on the long section of those chain rings. So it's almost like a 58-11, and then you skip over the dead spot. But the problem I had was seated climbing. I couldn't get my pedaling technique correct in the seat climbing, and I couldn't get my jump in the sprint. It felt like I was obviously in a massive, too big a gear when it came to those accelerations out of corners, or when the explosion in the sprint had to happen. I felt like it was more of a grind, which wasn't ideal for the sprint. It was okay if you're up at speed, and you're coming into the sprint at 70k an hour. There was no problem, but it was just that pure acceleration I had problems with, and then seated climbing I had some problems with it.
That's interesting. It sounds like there's an argument in there for perhaps using the chain rings for certain types of events. So maybe time trialing, for example. But if you're going to do race crits, and you mentioned there you struggle with that acceleration and the top end kicking out of bends, perhaps that wouldn't lend itself very well to asymmetric rings. But I think for me, I think it's kind of all or nothing. My gut would tell me you either have these rings on every bike, use them all the time, or you don't use them at all, because obviously it's going to change the firing patterns of your muscles. And bottom line for me is, if you've been used to pedaling, let's call it normally, with a normal chain ring for X number of years, for a long time, if you suddenly switch to these asymmetric chain rings, it's going to certainly feel pretty alien. And I think if you've got to buy into it or not. But as to answer the question in a nutshell, for me, are they advantageous or not? I think, as Kev said at the start, you can probably convince yourself either way, and there's obviously no concrete evidence either way out there. Otherwise, everyone would be using them or nobody would be using them. So the fact that we've got a split in the pro peloton suggests to me that inconclusive, and it's down to personal feel, and there's probably not a difference in terms of performance and power output. So unless you've got a burning desire to give them a go and try them, I'll probably save your money and spend it elsewhere.
Well, you remember Bradley Wiggins rode them for a couple of years there, and took them off and came back and won the Tour de France without them. And they did a lot of testing on them in Sky, as you can imagine, and they actually trick the strain gauges on the SRM also, so your power reads slightly higher than what you actually are producing also. But they were for the guys that don't have essentially a very smooth pedaling stroke. So, like, say if they're quad dominant and they stomp the pedals, then they can actually be quite effective. And that's kind of how you can, as you watch Chris Froome when he pedaled, he doesn't look a very nice pedaler at all. And he wasn't on round rings. When I was his teammate originally, he never pedaled, nice and smooth. He didn't have that nice hamstring pull, the glute activation, the nice round pedaling technique. And then you take Bradley Wiggins, he's probably one of the nicest, smoothest pedalers on the planet from all his track cycling. So as soon as they took him off these rings, again, he had his beautiful pedaling technique. He's got a nice round circular pedaling motion, and so there was no gains at all from him on the isometrics. Whereas you take a guy like Chris Froome who stomps the pedals, then I think he gets some gain there. And of course, I'm pretty sure now that he's won 4 Tour de France's on them, I'm pretty sure he's got a psychological gain there as well.
Yeah, but I would add that science and studies have shown that there is no perfect pedal stroke. We all have a different pedal stroke, as you mentioned then, Greg. Some stomp and some are smooth due to our different physiological makeup. And the way we pedal is generally our most efficient way of producing power. So some people, if they try to smooth that pedal stroke out, they're actually less efficient at their strong point, even though they're stronger down at the low point there. So there's gains to be made, but there's also losses at their other end as well. So there isn't a perfect pedal stroke we all should be chasing. It really is about you becoming more efficient in your own personal pedal stroke. And that's why I don't think the chainring suit everybody. But like you said, they might suit some people, but certainly not everyone.
That's a great point, Kev. We're all unique, all individuals, and whilst you can kind of perhaps work towards a certain pedaling style, we're not all the same. We're never all going to have the same pedaling strokes. So, and if you've been used to pedaling a certain way for 10 years, to suddenly change overnight is gonna slow you down. You're gonna produce less power because again you've got all that muscle memory you've been engineered to pedal a certain way. There we go. All right, I think we answered that one pretty comprehensively, guys. On to question 2. So question 2 is from Sebastian Abbey Jennison via Twitter. So thank you, Sebastian. And the question reads, riding up a climb with the jersey undone is less aero than a done-up jersey. With the lightweight jerseys out there now, why do we see pros riding unzipped? Even in the Tour, we see many of the French jerseys flapping in the breakaways, travelling at 40 kilometres an hour plus. Slightly controversial there, isolating one nationality, but we'll go for it.
It's a true point, though, isn't it? You look and you wouldn't see Team Sky riding uphill with a flapping jersey or even a flapping vest. That was the other thing I used to point out to some of my riders was like, if you're going to wear a vest, you wear the vest. You don't just leave it on your shoulders flapping because you're just dragging watts around. So it's the same sort of theory. I mean, I understand why in the heat the Frenchies have got their jerseys unzipped. It's the air breeze, it's the cool airflow. But with the technology nowadays and the new jerseys, there is so much airflow available now from these jerseys that it's not aero. And I guess there's lucky the French don't do it, or they might have won the Tour de France.
I think it's just more the psychological part of it. It obviously is a mistake to be doing it when speeds are high. But people, like you said, Greg, just that feeling of the airflow. And look, perhaps maybe the benefit of cooling the core body temperature outweighs the loss of the drag there. So who knows that part of it. But yeah, certainly doesn't look that good on TV anyway.
No, I think it kind of completes that image of, your Christian Cross, big necklace, swinging, jersey undone. It's just that image, isn't it? It's
tongue hanging out.
Lot to aspire to. Okay, next question from Holly Parsons that was sent in via Twitter. Again, thank you, Holly. Holly's question is a nice, simple one. Cycling cap or headband to keep sweat out of the eyes on Zwift? So I think, cycling cap or headband / sweatband. I think the answer is probably in the title. Sweatband for me, kind of that's going to help you absorb the sweat dripping down your forehead probably a little bit better than a cap.
Yeah, I just use a cap at the moment. I just whatever's lying around, whatever I grab my hands on first, basically. And at the moment, I'm wearing a cap. So, yeah, I think they're both quite effective.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you've got a towel handy, that's going to do the same job. Okay, question 4, sent in by Simon Macefield via Twitter. Thank you, Simon. And the question reads, heat training. Is there a benefit of keeping really hot off the bike in general in day-to-day life? Basically, would it benefit me to keep the heating on full blast in the house, heating on in the car whilst commuting, and wearing a thermal undervest or 2 to work? So other than obviously the heating bill may go through the roof, what are your thoughts on this, guys?
Well, there's definitely gains to be made by training correctly and efficiently with heat training. But to this extreme, it's just dangerous. You're at a high risk of heat stroke, hypothermia. You're going to break down muscle fibers. You're going to break down the muscle, nausea. It's obviously taken to the extreme, and it just isn't safe.
You can actually get a large adaptation to heat by just doing an hour a day in a heat chamber, like a homemade heat chamber, and because your primary adaptations are increase in plasma volume, and then your goal with heat training is to raise your core temperature a little bit, and then that's where your acclimation starts occurring. So you can actually then do your hour. Your training only has to be 50 to 70% of your VO2 max. It doesn't have to be super, super hard. And within 6 days, you've actually gained a nice bump in your plasma volume and your lower core temperature at rest. So it's not a lot you have to do. Up to 14 days and you can be totally acclimated. But I just don't think it's necessary to be then, after that training session, wrapping up warm, heater on the car. I just don't think that's necessary. I think more importantly then is your recovery, your rehydration, and preparing for the next day's session.
Yeah, and I think taking that real extreme, this level of thinking here, where we're kind of trying to think about, what are these extra marginal gains. I think, even for a pro rider, this thinking is taking it a bit of a step too far. If you're in work with an undervest on, all to try and get a minor adaptation in your cycling performance, in thinking about your normal lifestyle, if I was a kind of a lifestyle coach, I'd say, well, hang on here, don't even think about these type of things. Probably just a step too far. So as well as not being advantageous for your performance on a bike, I think mentally it's going to be a bit all too consuming and certainly not sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, and you used the right word there, Greg, when you said recovery. If you're doing it to this extreme, you're not going to allow your body the time to recover and make those changes there. So as you said there, Greg, generally about an hour a day for anywhere from 6 to 14 days is going to give you a massive boost in VO2 and blood plasma and aerobic performance. So the gains are there to be made, but definitely be sensible with it.
It's interesting coming up though with a lot of this is very prevalent right now with obviously Tokyo on the horizon. So you'll see a lot of the guys now starting to look at. So there's a difference between acclimation and acclimatization. So acclimation's where you actually simulate the environment at your own place. Like a heat chamber or something like that. But then you'll see acclimatizations when you actually go and live in the environment that you're going to be racing in. So you'll see teams heading over to. I was on the plane just recently over to Tokyo, and I was sitting beside the head coach of New Zealand sailing, and they were just going over to do a regatta because it was similar time now. The heat and the humidity were about this time of year. It was as close as they could get to what Tokyo was going to be. So they're already looking at. Because when you're on a boat, I didn't even know this. I had a great conversation with him. When you're on a boat out there, you're out there for close to 8 hours because of your, you're out. You've got 3 or 4 races on the water in one day. So imagine the dehydration and the blooming heat stress that they'll be putting on their body in that time. So, and of course, again, this has gone a little bit off topic, but they were looking at tides and things like that, and wind at this time of year. So, just the intricacies that there's so many intricacies in every sport. You think cycling, all these marginal gains and things like this, but this is sailing, heading over. Last week, 2 weeks ago, to go and get the tides and the heat and the currents and things like that. It was a pretty interesting conversation, actually.
Yeah, but we need to also remember the point that the heat training isn't just for performing in the heat. It's for increased performance. So even in cold weather racing, by training and implementing heat methods, you're actually going to improve your performance in all weather conditions. So there is that acclimatization aspect to it as well, but there's also the physiological benefits to the blood that we mentioned that happen as well. So it really is. I think it's not new science, but with the increase of indoor training, particularly with Zwift now, a lot of people are getting the benefit from it, and in some ways not understanding why, but just all of a sudden realizing I'm riding the ergo 6 days a week and I'm flying. So that's one of the main reasons.
I think if we just recap for Simon's benefit, while we're not advocating you go to the extreme of thermal undervest and heating on in the car and all that, Kev, you give a great bit of advice on the last podcast. So if Simon, if you missed that, we'll just recap about after a session having a hot bath or a hot shower. Do you just want to recap on that one, Kev?
Yeah, so this year we've been playing with the ways we implement heat training methods, and in previous years we've had a huge gain just from the Zwift sessions, the riding the ergo indoors, and leading into big races. We were doing a block of anywhere from 6 to 10 days of just ergo sessions leading into a major race. And this year we started implementing going from the ergo into a hot bath for 35 to 40 minutes straight after the ergo session, just to extend that heat effect. And we've had some really good results with that as well this year. So that's probably the extreme. That's as far as we would go with heat training, putting the 2 sessions back to back. But as we said, there's massive gains to be made, and these benefits last for quite a while.
Well, there you go, Simon. Maybe give the hot baths a try instead. Well, that rounds up Zwift Coaching Podcast number 18. We'll see you next time. Cheers, Greg. Cheers, Kev.
Excellent, mate. Thanks again, and we'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, great work. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Greg.